When was the last time that you faced the social pressure of this screen, the extra taps, the guilt of going out of your way to tip 10% instead of 20%? And the server is gonna know that you're a cheap bastard, and so will the person behind you.
How much would you like to tip?
I'm not tipping on a $700 ticket.
Give you another ticket for being cheap.
And tipping has gone out of control in the US. Tip fatigue and tipflation are real. 66% of Americans view tipping negatively, and 30% say this shit is out of control. And there are many culprits, and we're gonna get to them, but the most obvious one is this one. But it actually started here.
This little device, and it plugs into the headphone jack.
Simple subtleties, not just the screen UI itself, but also the placement of the elements around it. Even the tip jar itself influenced that microsecond decision of how much to tip. And whatever they're doing, it's working. It's making us spend 11% more on tips than we used to. So if you don't want to be fooled by the power of a really good user interface, you should know where it all came from. And it all started with this.
Square will be here, here, and here.
And the problem was very simple. This guy liked to blow glass, and he liked to sell the glass that he blew.
This is pure glass.
And after doing it for over 20 years, he started his own company in 2001, and he was doing great. But then fast forward to 2009, middle of a financial crisis, every sale counts. And Jim gets a phone call, which is a done deal. It's a sale of one of his faucets for $3,000.
I'm sorry, I don't take American Express. Don't you have a Visa card?
No, maybe my husband has one and he'll be back in a week.
Now, most of Jim's customers paid cash or check. Remember, this is 2000s.
That'll be $80.
Oh, okay. Sure, thank you kindly.
But for the occasional card customer, Jim had managed to accept credit cards, which was a freaking mess. You needed to apply for a merchant account, which is a special type of bank account, and then you had to buy or lease a credit card terminal, which could have cost thousands of dollars. You had to install the thing, of course, and then pay monthly fees, minimum processing fees, compliance fees, and then something in the range of 6% per transaction. And at the end of the day, you needed to batch process all of the swipes that you had made, send them to the bank, and after all of this, all that Jim could take was Visa or MasterCard. So Jim set out to build something. Now, he didn't only blow glass. Around '89, Jim had started another company called Mira. They had a document imaging software called Look, which was not too similar from the Acrobat Reader today. And then they tried a trade show directory business, and then the internet killed that.
I knew it was going to happen. Like, it was pretty obvious that it was going to wipe the business out. And I tried to get all the people who worked with me to change businesses. There was only one person who listened to me. It was my 15-year-old summer intern. So we basically left the rest of the company to die. And I went off with the summer intern and built a new company. That summer intern was Jack Dorsey.
Who had recently spun off Twitter out of another company. Go watch our video about it. He also got in touch with Robert Morley, a fellow professor at Washington University who really looks like one of our investors, Steve Barsh. Now, Robert had patented the idea of a dongle that could read magnetic strips, just like those on credit cards, and connect to an audio jack. So Jim seems to have stolen this concept, flown to San Francisco to work with Jack, and then within a month, they had come up with the first prototype of Square. Now, Professor Morley ended up suing Square later, and they settled, but I don't want to skip ahead in the story. So these guys raised a $10 million Series A in November, famously pitched with a pitch deck that said 140 reasons why this company will fail. And then by May 2010, Square went live to the public.
Square is everywhere. Making and taking payments is easier for everyone. So go to squareup.com.
Wait. See how Square had to add up to the domain to be able to have a .com? Well, that doesn't have to be you, because you could use a .tech domain. For the longest time, tech startups have settled for terrible .com domains, long, clunky, like stuffed with extra words or hyphens, to stand out because they didn't have other options. Thankfully, now we have .tech domain extensions, officially available as of August 2015. It's without a doubt the most obvious, the most relevant domain name that a tech startup can use for their website, and startups can just add .tech to their brand name and just get exactly the domain that they want. Some really cool tech startups in the world, like Nothing.tech or Aurora.tech, 1x.tech, they're using .tech domains for their websites. And they are not alone. Over 500,000 tech startups worldwide have raised over $5 billion in funding using .tech domains on their website. You can make a simple choice, which makes a big difference in your online presence. They are also the sponsors of today's video, and they have offered you guys a sweet 50% discount on your first year of registration. So just visit go.tech/Slidebean and get a .tech domain today.
You probably know Square as the little white reader that lets you accept payments anywhere.
Square was a massive hit. This dongle was free, and it worked with the audio jack on your phone. What? And you could just swipe any card with your phone and then sign using your finger and a touchscreen. And the dongle thing was free, no subscriptions, nothing. Just a very standard 2.75% plus 15 cents per transaction. And dongles apparently cost the company $1 or $2 to manufacture. So imagine this massive marketing campaign in which acquiring a customer cost them $2. Like all they needed was them to process about $70 worth of transactions and they would break even. That, against the mess that it was to build cards before then, what was not to like? 1 year after launch, they had shipped 500,000 Square readers, and Square was on its way to revolutionizing payment.
Well, Square is one of the so-called unicorns.
It's really changed the way these vendors are doing businesses.
The fastest growing companies in our entire database.
And they've been doing really well in the public markets today.
And then we've arrived at the pivotal moment for our wallets, at least. In a Blue Bottle coffee shop in San Francisco, Jack Dorsey unveiled the Square stand. The first stand had a credit card reader, of course, USB ports, a barcode signer, a receipt printer, and a cash register box.
Square really fits in perfectly with our aesthetic. We put our Square stand just right on our countertop.
More than slashing the price of a cash register, which could easily go over $1,000, Square's software was slick, it was easy to use, especially for small businesses. It removed the need for IT departments to support the cash register. And then we've arrived at the tipping point. Get it? Because yeah. Understandably, you had to swivel to sign your card receipt. This is a necessary user experience. Everybody expects to do this thing, but what about the tip? Now let's first set the record straight on tips, because this is massively different around the world. As you can see, tipping in the US is especially bad.
Oh my gosh, babe, you brought me food. That's so nice of you. Yeah. Are you serious?
But this dates back to the Civil War. Americans who had started traveling to Europe in greater numbers so that English aristocrats would tip their servants. So they imported this practice. But employers quickly caught hand of this and started keeping wages low, intentionally knowing that their employees would make it up with the tips that they were making. And then the Pullman Palace Car Company is one of the first companies on record for paying sub-living wages. All of their drivers also happen to be black, so there's that. And people hating tipping since then. This guy, William Scott, wrote a book about it in 1916 and called it
A Cancer on the Breast of Democracy.
Now, after World War II, many European countries replaced tips with service charges that would just come on your bill. But America didn't feel World War II like that. And tipping culture is no minor predicament. Some people theorize that there's a feeling of importance if you tip. I normally pay for my own dinners, but whenever somebody else does and they tip an abnormal amount, there is a feeling of authority, right? Like this person does so well that they can tip $100, which I would never.
It's like I'm throwing a buck away. I mean, if they don't notice it, what's the point?
I've never been that person, so I wonder how that feels, but the opposite of that is the disapproval. If a group of friends goes out for dinner, you can't be the guy that tips less.
Come on, throw in a buck.
I don't tip.
You don't tip?
No, I don't believe in it.
Michael Lynn, a Cornell researcher that has studied tipping all his life.
I went to Cornell. You ever heard of it?
Argues that tipping became widespread as people tried to pay extra for this special treatment. And it eventually got so widespread that non-tippers were at a disadvantage. And more importantly, they were judged.
I don't tip because society says I have to.
You don't have any idea what you're talking about. This is a hard job.
So is working at McDonald's, but you don't feel the need to tip them, do you?
Now add to this, well, capitalism. Like not unlike that car company in the 1800s, we are constantly fed the news that service workers are paid like shit. We are guilted into thinking that the waitress makes a shit salary, and so it's our job to tip and make up for that. So tipping at this point is less a reflection of good or bad service, and it's become expected and mandatory. Now granted, waiters in the US are usually extremely nice, and then the opposite of this is Costa Rica, where I hail from, where a 10% tip or service charge is always included in the bill, and then there's no incentive to provide this particular customer a better service. And so this brings me back to that millisecond decision on which button are you gonna press next. If you were wondering, by the way, the default tip options on these screens are 100% customizable and defined by each restaurant. So it's not Square that's setting up that 20% tip for you. And this is where 100 different variables of this offline plus online user experience collide. The tip jar used to be this passive presence. It made tipping a voluntary decision. You had to choose to take action. And nobody tips on an empty jar, obviously, so restaurant workers would often fill the jar with some bills to put some social pressure on you. And that was called salting the tip jar. But now the tip has been made a part of the confirmation. You need to press a button after you sign, and you have no idea what the person ahead of you did, except if they had to tap 3 or 4 times, which means that they ignore the default options. Also, the tipping jar was kind of disconnected from the human interaction that you're having with the person standing in front of you, who is waiting for you to confirm. Were they nice in the 3 sentences that you exchanged to order your taco? Like, do you need to reward them for how good the taco is gonna be? Is the tips gonna be shared with the taco maker? As much as this is part of a much bigger problem, Square does make that tiny extra 2.6% for every transaction. So it is also in their very best interest to optimize that user experience to the absolute best with the right font and the right color and the right button size. And this works. 1 in 3 people feel pressured to tip, and a quarter think that the experience is overwhelming. Yeah, no shit. 42% of people are tipping at fast casual restaurants. And here's the stat that you've been looking for. Responders to this Forbes survey said that they leave a tip at least 11% higher when they tip digitally. That, folks, is social engineering. And I'm not saying that this is Square's fault by any means, and Square is certainly not the only company in the business of POS systems. But you could very well say that they inspired many other designs out there. Square eventually became Block, and as of last quarter, they processed about $50 billion worth of transactions. But that's how we landed where we are now, in this insanely confusing situation where we don't know when we should be tipping. Our wallets suffer, obviously, but tip fatigue has impacted servers at sit-down restaurants more than anyone else. A survey by Bankrate showed that only 65% of Americans are tipping at restaurants now, down from 77% in 2019. And it's not rocket science. If everyone demands a tip now and money lasts less, then someone is bound to take a hit. Oh, and before you go and join an anti-tipping movement, just know that it's been attempted many times, but those efforts never tend to spread much.
All right, since you pay for the breakfast, I'll put in, but normally I would never do this.
What you can absolutely do is check out our video on the origin story of WhatsApp and its secret business model. We'll see you in the next one.